Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. But as always, Paul, with the nostalgic twist, and we are bringing the nostalgia, quite a hard-hitting nostalgia actually this week, isn't it? It has been a bit of an anniversary that we're going to, is celebrate the right word, Paul?
I think it is celebrate in this case because this is an incident that we've referenced so many times before on the podcast, but not actually ever done anything in particular that we've really focused in on it quite like we will be doing today. So yeah, let's call it a celebration.
It is. I did a marvelous little thread on this on Sunday when it was the actual anniversary of. So it was the 23rd of November. We're recording a few days later on the 27th, and then I've just been rewatching clips back of this whilst I've been away in Germany, Paul. And to put the listeners out of the misery, this is an episode all about Luis Figo going back to the Camp Nou, that iconic game where it was just volcanic. The atmosphere was like just electric. It was borderline violent. It was just everything you would expect from the height of an El Clásico. And like I say, 23 years ago, Paul, and it was such a defining moment, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's one of those ones that I think probably is one of the most, if not the most, iconic incidents in a Spanish football game where the ball's not in play. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that across European football, it's probably one of the most well-remembered and iconic moments, which doesn't actually involve a ball being kicked. I think the only thing that really comes close to it is maybe Eric Cantona's Kung Fu kick in the, what was that, in mid-90s, wasn't it? So I think this is an incident everybody knows, and not necessarily because of the football itself.
Not always, no. Like, so with this one, with Figo's move here, obviously between, I want to use the word nemesis. You know, there's arch rivals, but then there's Barcelona and Real Madrid, really, in the grand scheme of things. But his move from Barcelona to Real Madrid was one of the most politically charged transfers in probably not just Spanish football, probably ever. You don't see these kind of moves. You know, some people might throw at me, oh, well, Sol Campbell going from Tottenham to Arsenal might be up there, or Carlos Tevez leaving Manchester United to go to Manchester City. This is both of those transfers combined, plus, I don't know, a nuclear bomb on top of it. This just wasn't the done thing. And, you know, Luis Figo is such a player that is synonymous with Real Madrid, especially during, I want to say, our era, Paul, obviously, as two gentlemen in their mid-30s. We'll probably remember him more for what he was doing at Real Madrid as he joined them in the turn of the century. But, you know, when you look back at Figo during the Barcelona years, you really do see how much an important cog, leader, talent he was for Barcelona. He arrives in 1995. He turns and evolves into an instant leader, and his role in that dream team too, under Robson and Louis van Gaal, was just incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. He's such an important part to play in it. This is the Barcelona that obviously in 1992 they win the European Cup, and from then onwards, I'd say that it's about just building themselves up to be. Contextually, this is where we've spoke about it before, about this being a point in time where football's moving itself into the business or the commercial world, and Barcelona are really starting to establish themselves beyond the football pitch as a brand as well. And I don't like using that word, and I know that it's not something that we because we love football, it's not really something we like to talk about, is the business side of it. But this is a really important period in football, modern football history, where the game is really accelerating forward in terms of finance and attention on and off the field. You've got television explosion of viewing figures. You've got a rise in tensions. I think it, and if you look back then, I feel like between the mid-90s to I'd say the end of the 2010s, there was a different atmosphere at football grounds. It was more of it felt like a real theatre. And certainly
Mm,
in the case of what we're going to talk about here with Figo coming back to the Camp Nou, it was like there was an energy in the stands that I would argue, and obviously it's up to other people whether or not they agree, but I would argue that nowadays, certainly in the top flight, as we are 20 or so years on from this time, that actually football grounds in the top tier of Spain, England, to an extent Germany as well, but less so perhaps. There's been this kind of not gentrification, but there's been
mm,
a commercialization in a way that actually you don't get the intensity, you don't get the same energy and atmosphere and all the other cliched adjectives
mm.
that we like to throw
Yeah.
about. So, yeah, so to think about it with the role that Figo played, he was the fulcrum, I suppose you could say, because of where he played on the pitch for this Barcelona team that was, um, you know, um, leading the charge alongside Real Madrid in terms of making Spanish football have a real presence on the European field. Obviously, we all think back to the Champions League being on. Well, if you're in the UK, it was on ITV, wasn't it?
Mm,
And it was easy to tune into, and we're at a time where people wanted to watch the Spanish teams and the Italian teams just as much as they wanted to watch, the English teams. And I'm talking from the point of view of being, at the time a young lad growing up in the northwest of England. I was keen whenever there was opportunity to watch Barcelona, Real Madrid, or any of the Italian teams. At the time, it was your eyes were glued to it, and Figo, somebody who certainly for Barcelona in that early period was integral to the image that was portrayed of Barcelona across the world.
yeah, absolutely. I think, like you say, you've hit on a really interesting point there about how these atmospheres can be generated and how they were different back then. It was only this weekend that you heard choruses of Barcelona going back to the new Camp Nou, or the Spotify Camp Nou, whatever they call it now, and people screaming grand animation and wanting more noise and things like that.
Yeah.
But, like you say, I get it was a lower capacity than it should be, but there's still, like I say, isn't that furore, that intensity, like you said, Paul, about atmospheres as we had it back then. And like you say, a big part of Barcelona's success whilst Figo was there, just looking at some of the accolades here, key trophies won with Barcelona for Figo: 2 La Liga trophies in 98-99, a Copa del Rey in 97, the Spanish Super Cup in 1996, UEFA Cup Winners' Cup in 97, UEFA Super Cup in 1997 as well. He was a captain. He was a symbolic figure for supporters as well. And all of this would have you think that Luis Figo is untouchable. You cannot sign him. He goes into a category of player that doesn't have a price because you cannot be taken away. However, at this point in time, towards the turn of millennium, there are feelings coming out that Figo might actually be touchable here.
Mm-hmm.
He might actually be available. And it comes in two parts, doesn't it? There's the one part where you've got Luis Figo and his camp feel that he is undervalued at Barcelona, and despite all the on-pitch success and the manner that he holds with the fans, he feels like the club's hierarchy doesn't back him as much as he should do. Certainly, the way they praise other players that were in that squad. And then you've also got this interesting factor of the presidential race between Juan Gaspar and Florentino Perez at Real Madrid, which is just a bit of ultimate shithousery to begin with, really. Do you actually think Florentino Perez meant it when he said that if I become president, I will sign Luis Figo from Barcelona?
I can only give you really my view in hindsight, and I'll explain that in the sense of Florentino Perez tends to do what he says he's going to do in the transfer market, at least. If he says he's going to try and get this player, he tends to get him. Sometimes it takes a bit longer than people would like. You know, sometimes it's not the immediate transfer window after he says he's going to do it, but he tends to get his targets when he says it. So, yeah, I fully believe that. Yeah, he had he was convinced that he could do it, and obviously he did. And I think just to go back to a point you said there about Figo, maybe not, and his camp not feeling fully appreciated. I think, with the risk of repeating myself, about the point in time of football's development and the commercialization, I think that sort of feeling of underappreciation is directly drawn out of them recognizing where football's going as a business. You know, the advertising campaigns, the face on billboards, the cash that comes with it. And we're entering an era, and to go to Florentino Perez, you know, the signing of Figo really is the kickstart of the first Galactico era, which we've done a brilliant episode on, and I'd encourage everybody to go back and listen to. But we're seeing that what came with that was the boot deals, the sponsorships, the billboards. So I think that was the Figo camp being acutely aware of what was around the corner and wanting to get that from Barcelona. And obviously when Florentino Perez, because they activate his release, don't they? So yeah, I don't think there was any doubt in Perez's mind that it was achievable. And whether you like him or not, he does tend to do what he says he's going to do, and he tends to get the players that he wants to get.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting part on. I suppose I understand where the Barcelona's club stance is, because at that time they were always a club which sort of acknowledged that no player is bigger than the club. That image has really shifted, obviously, during, say, like the Messi years. But even looks to sort of like some of the icons that were there. You saw the likes of Johan Cruyff, who was a legend both in player and manager. Essentially be, I don't want to use the word ousted, but like he didn't get to leave on his own terms, really, did he? Because the club was bigger than the manager.
Yeah.
So it must have always been difficult for Luis Figo in any situation to sort of like make that point that I need to be bigger than the club here. And like you say, I imagine that is definitely the source of friction that came there. And like you say, where agents are involved now as well, a lot more prominently than they were, say, maybe like 5 years earlier at this time, back in 1995, you start to see sort of like the chess game between it. And that final trigger where Real Madrid pay the full release clause, it's a gamble having a release clause in a superstar's contract like that. But when you've got a club like Real Madrid, who are, at the time were willing to splash the cash, and obviously they went to do it a lot more, it was the perfect tinderbox, wasn't it? And you saw that immediate reaction in Spain, that shock, that anger, the shift in identity of both clubs as well, Paul. Like you say, you saw basically Real Madrid take a bit of a step on Barcelona, because it's always a bit of a tit for tat between those two clubs. The fact that one could take the star player, another immediately relegated Barcelona to sort of like second fiddle behind Real Madrid.
That's a real important point that I think shouldn't be underappreciated. It is a case of they've scored one over you, and they've not just done that, they've knocked you down a peg because they've lured one of your prized assets away, and that de facto creates a not just the us versus them, but it implies a superiority of status between the two, which it's not to say that it's unprecedented for football at this time, because obviously, you know, we were in an era where players would move clubs quite frequently, and you know, football had been around for a long time. But it's important because it's also the moment and the timing of it that you don't usually get such a high profile player going to such a bitter rival. And I know that, like, I am again going to sound like I'm repeating myself, because we were at a point in time where there was so much intensity in football stadiums during games at the time, and it was an electric atmosphere, and there was a energy about the place. And I know I'm using a lot of cliches here, but that helped breed the rivalry further. You know, it meant that it wasn't just a case of, you know, let's not pretend that like the 80s in England didn't happen and stuff. This is Spain. It's got its own story, and I don't want to belittle it anyway, or, you know, trivialize anything that came before this, because, you know, as we, and I'm sure everybody listening knows, Spanish football's got such a rich history, which is why it's, you know, what we love. So, but the decision to leave Barcelona and go to Real Madrid at that point in time, where football is becoming an increasingly important factor in people's lives and in television media and newspapers, and it's everywhere, and it's all growing. Everybody's got and you've got the intensity on the terraces that now spills over into the streets. It doesn't stop. It's I don't know how to explain it. It's just like,
Yeah, it was like a powder keg, wasn't it?
yeah, exactly. And it makes great television, doesn't it? You know.
Well, I think that's it, you know, and we would be naive to say that, you know, the Barcelona Real Madrid rivalry wasn't really, you know, that before Luis Figo moved to Real Madrid. That's not the case at all. There always has
No.
been this rivalry between Real Madrid and Barcelona, whether it's a class rivalry, whether it's a rivalry of ideology, whether it's what they represent in terms of, you know, the centre of Spain against Catalan independence, whatever it may be. But this, for me, is the first time where football became the real source of the rivalry, and it basically lit what the El Clásico is now as we know it. Now, I would say that it's lost a bit of its temperament in the last maybe 10 years, you know, but between 2000 and 2000 and I want to say 15, 16, towards the back end of the Ronaldo-Messi rivalry, you know, those El Clásicos were the game to watch on television. They were they were the most watched game. They were the most talked about game in world football. And
It was
you know,
the biggest fixture in world football, and I know that there might be an entire continent of South Americans that would say, you know, Boca versus River Plate is more intense and everything. And I'm not trying to say that, you know, that one's better than the other or anything. What I mean by that is that Barcelona Real Madrid was had an intensity that extended beyond Spain and the Spanish Peninsula or Iberian Peninsula. Politically correct terms here. You know, it was one that all of Europe was aware of, and I'd say pretty much all of Europe was watching it as well. You know, because of the stars involved, because of the intensity between the two clubs, because of the distinct differences in philosophies. You know, it was it added to the grandeur of what we now know, or what we do know as El Clásico.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, we celebrate the 23rd of November 2002, as we said at the top end of the podcast. But that was actually the second time he referred to it. And just to dispel some myths here, Paul, because I saw a lot of information at the weekend where people were saying from October it was 25 years since Figo returned to the Camp Nou. Yes, that's correct. He did have his first return to the Camp Nou in 2000, just after he'd signed from Real Madrid. And that's where you would maybe expect, the hostility and the extreme images that we saw, it was still hostile, but it was controlled. And I
It
think that's
was,
because people were still digesting what had happened. This was very
yeah,
shortly after he'd
it was
signed.
almost like too soon, still raw, very mild by comparison to what comes. But like I say, I think that this is because the transfer is kind of so seismic, but it comes at a time of football's, I'll use the word development, or acceleration, that it kind of, it's not until the next time round that people have had the opportunity to really sort of process how they feel about it,
Hmm. What
take
is it?
on board.
The 5 stages of grief?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's festered and it's become this, resentment. What do you call it?
Mm.
This is really where you see the word traitor, and this is where it's said with real venom by fans.
Yeah, Judas is always the one for me, which
Yeah.
I think when we're in the UK, we throw that word around quite willy nilly. But I think in a predominantly Catholic country, when you see that word displayed, it's meant with the highest of sentiment as well. And that's exactly what we saw in the second game, the one that happened in 2002.
Mhm.
And and again, there's probably another string to pull on here where we keep talking about sort of like that turning point for football in terms of modernization, commercialization. In the build up to this game, it's quite important to take a few things into factor. In 2002, Real Madrid, as we've already spoken about, start this Galacticos era with Luis Figo in 2000. They then bring in Zinedine Zidane. They then bring in Ronaldo, who is obviously another former Barcelona player, and they've basically got this squad assembled that is going to be untouchable. On the other side of the fence, like you say, that feeling from Barcelona that they were second best at the time, they were in a period of instability, poor league form, a lot of fan discontent towards the board, and there was a lot of concern from the authorities that actually this isn't just going to be about Figo. This
Mm.
is going to be about the Clásico as a whole, the feeling of inequality between the two sides. And again, something that is entirely new at this time. Maybe not new, but I think it's certainly got a bit more. What's the word I'm looking for? Liberal with its attitude. The
Mm.
press, during the early 90s, or certainly before that, they weren't as kind of like as bombastic is the word I'm going to use. That is a horrendous word to use, but do you know what I mean? Like they weren't as out there with their headlines, and they
Yes.
really fueled the fire around this, didn't they? They really
Yeah.
took this and went, "This is a chance for you to aim as much abuse as you can between each other and stoke those flames of tension."
This is a period where early 2000s, the press pick up on the narrative, or they not so much pick up on it. It's always been there. They've emboldened some of the
That's a good
um,
word.
some of the differences, and they've played against the sort of the deep rooted grievances that both sides play against one another. I mean, we already know how partisan the newspapers are in Spain. Obviously you've got
Mm.
Marca on the one side, Mundo Deportivo on the other, etc. I'm not going to list them all because they're not paying us to advertise. But but it is a case of the early 2000s. And I would say what you've got to bear in mind, keeping in the context of, I know that we have listeners who are our age, some that are older. We also have some that are a handful of years younger, I guess, as well. And it might be that we're probably sounding like the old blokes in the room here, but I recall, like, in the early 2000s as well, that more so than ever before, that there was a lot more warnings against journalists, or there was disciplinary action taken more against journalists for like the way that they would follow people, or the salacious headlines that they might write by footballers. Footballers would potentially attempt to litigate, or they would have to deal with a lot more ferocity from journalists. I mean, anybody who's, if you don't recall, if you've seen the Beckham documentary of when he goes to Madrid in 2003 and the way that the journalists behaved towards him then, I would say that in that documentary they make it sound like it was worse than it's ever been. I'm not sure if that is entirely fair to say, because I think that there was always this kind of maybe going one step too far in behaviour of of how they were stoking the tensions, or how they were following some players around. I think it's just because obviously it's David Beckham and he was, the global superstar, or the English language global superstar, that perhaps we're more attuned into it. But the media played such a big part, and still does, but to a lesser extent now. I feel like you touched on it before, that certainly in the last 10 years, it feels like El Clásico has not like lost its intensity in the rivalry. I don't think that that's fair, but I think it's become a victim, like all other football rivalries, of this over commercialization, which has actually diluted the and I'm wary that I might offend people here, but it's diluted some of the passion that you see in the terraces, because you get more. You perhaps have priced out some of the more hardcore fans, and that, again, I do appreciate that might be insulting to some people who, would, or some people might assume that I'm turning that into a class or a classist comment about football rivalries or football fandom, and I'm not. What I'm saying is that nowadays, when you've got people who are paying 300 or 400 euros for one match, an El Clásico ticket, I think most average price is about 400 euros on it, I think, for the last one this season. You are getting a different type of fan. That means that the atmosphere isn't quite what it was, and also on the field, there's other things at play, and there's more to it than that. But I feel like certainly on and off the field, there's been a change in intensity. Whereas at this point, you're right, the media played such a heavy part. And I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, so you need to reel me back in.
No, but I think it's again, when we like tangents on this podcast, Paul, so never apologise for a tangent, because I think there's two things you picked on there that are absolutely right, which will lead us back to this night in November 2002. The one thing I always look at it here is, like you say, is basically El Clásico is an advert now. Whether we like it or not, you sell prime time slots. If they could advertise in the middle of the game, they would do. That's why our Clásicos now get played in places like Saudi Arabia, because they know for a fact in the Supercopa de España that those two teams will be involved. So it has lost a part of that. We saw the game at the weekend, 199 euros for a ticket to go to a 6.5 empty stadium. For Barcelona, it has got ridiculous that way. And that is why we're so far removed from that. But I also think on the pitch as well, and I think there's obviously a bit recently where we saw maybe shades of what it used to be like between Lamine Yamal and Dani Carvajal. Yeah. But there's also quite an assumption that actually there's a bit of respect between the players on the pitch as professionals. And that happens everywhere, to be fair now. Like I say, there are a lot more players are a lot more closer than they used to be. There's not many, super rivalries out there anymore. But like you say, comparing what we have now to what we have in 2002, it's night and day. And I'll describe to you the atmosphere inside the Camp Nou on this day, on the 23rd of November. You've got just shy of 100,000 Barcelona fans in the cauldron that is Camp Nou as well. Open roof too, apart from that little bit that they had. All of them screaming abuse, all of them with sort of like signs reading, as you said, Judas or traitor, or you went to Madrid for the money, you're a snake, and you're rata type thing. Yeah. And it's easy to say, oh, it's because Figo came back. But it's not just that. Like you say, we're talking about the inequalities between the two clubs. Figo became the symbol, or the symbolic target, I should say, of the wider anger at the club's direction and its decline. And it was an eye-opener for Barcelona as well. I think they saw that. We look at the game itself, projectiles being thrown from the stands, whether it's bottles or coins, cigarette lighters. Every time Figo came to take a corner, he is targeted by the volcanic sort of toxicity of the home crowd.
Yeah.
And then obviously it descends into complete and utter chaos when possibly the most famous image from this game is taken. And that is when a pig's head is thrown onto the pitch as Figo tries to take a corner. That's actually, again, quite symbolic in itself, isn't it? It's not the first time we've seen a pig's head on the football pitch, but for this one, it's...
Oh, this is... It's important, actually, to just think, and I would encourage anybody to just go and watch the clips, watch the footage back, because it is, he's walking towards the corner. There's bottles. I think at one point he does pick up an empty Coca-Cola bottle, I think, or it might have been Pepsi. I don't really know. Again, we're not sponsored by either, but I think it's irrelevant anyway what brand it is. But he picks up, and then you can still see it raining down, and then the highlights now, whenever, because it's been chopped up that many times, the footage. You can see there's big glass bottles of. Do you know that? What's that yellow label with the red light? Is it J&B?
Yeah.
It's like somebody's got had a full bottle of that in the ground and launched. How's that got in? But then it goes one step further with the pig's head that's faced. How would you call it? Neck down in the grass, glaring up into the night. This suckling pig's head, which you're right, is symbolic. It says a lot about, I suppose, as well. It's like there's a layered insult to it, isn't there? Really, because of what it is. And I think it's kind of like only in Spain, really, that you'd get that. It's kind of like there's something quintessential about it, where I think it just makes it just adds to the air of Spanish football. And I would say as well, what I noticed watching it back, because watched it back hundreds of times, but particularly in preparation for this, is like you spot that the people, everybody stood up and gesticulating, even if they've not got something to throw. They're showing like a middle finger or doing other types of gestures. And there's one clip I've seen, and there's this guy, and he's got long hair, and he's got one scarf tied around one wrist, and his other wrist has got another scarf, and he's got this giant, we'll say, bespoke cigarette in in between his two fingers, and it's just a big cloud of smoke. And I thought, actually, there's a unique intensity there. That it's just a completely, anybody who goes to a football match now could probably not really recall, like, days when things were as chaotic as that. It's a moment caught in time, isn't it, really? And then there's just this shining under the lights, there's this glazed pig's head staring up at the sky.
Like you say, as far as things, raining down onto the pitch, it is the pig's head, where, like you say, it's a metaphor, isn't it? It is a metaphor to suggest, like, it could be a couple of things, really. It could be we're calling you a greedy pig or something like that for going to Real Madrid and taking money, or it could be a lot more malicious in terms of, say, decapitated head on the pitch, so to speak. This is our violent side. I'm maybe pushing the envelope a little bit on that one. It did really focus the attentions of the Spanish media and the Spanish authorities, wider about La Liga security. I think, like you say, we've had instances in the past where we've had violence in football, but I don't think we've ever seen it this much from the fans, and it did make them sort of like rethink, how do we get, like say, people you shouldn't be able to bring a glass bottle, you shouldn't be able to bring a pig's head into a football stadium.
On the one hand, it deserves a bit of credit though for its inventiveness, doesn't it? I mean, it's
up there with the chicken that was at Blackburn Rovers a few years ago.
And that, I mean, we're not an English football podcast, but that's a moment that if anybody's never seen, was it Steve Keane out on it, Venky's chicken crawling off the pitch, fantastic.
Oh no, it's like you say, people get very clever with it, and like you say, this match is just mired by incident after incident after incident. There are so many match interruptions. We get the referee stopping play as well due to all these objects raining down on the pitch at corner kicks. You see there's two sort of iconic images, isn't there? There's one where Luis Figo is taking a corner and he's got the policeman stood next to him in his full, like, basically riot gear, and then you've also got the one where Figo's being crowded off the pitch and clearly being protected by the Policia Nacional as they go and take like a bit of a break whilst they try and ease the atmosphere a little bit.
Yeah, because I don't think we've clarified, but we should. This happens in the 72nd minute, and the referee he halts the match. It's Luis Medina Cantalejo, sorry. Who does sort of call a halt to things. They get the area around the corner. I'd say it was not swept clean, is it? But they get their litter pickers out and stuff, and they do try to restore some order and clear the path. And you can see that there's stewards and stuff trying to reason with the crowd. It stops for about a quarter of an hour, I think, like 10 or 15 minutes anyway. And yeah, it's quite a moment. And I think what I find curious as well is, like, it's not the first corner that he takes. It's like it's quite late on, so it's clearly been stewing. But then,
I found it interesting that in the first game back at the Camp Nou, I think Figo started on corners and then they realised there was going to be a bit of fun, so they took him off corners. So if that's your attitude for the first game back at the Camp Nou, you'd think naturally the second game back at the Camp Nou, you go, maybe let Zizou have this, or Guti, or Roberto Carlos, or someone.
Not like the short set piece takers, is it?
Yeah, exactly. So you're thinking they've clearly made the decision here not to be frustrated or tempered by the atmosphere, and just for fun as well. The thing is, I always look at this, Paul, when I come back to think of this game, you'd think it was an absolute like 3-0 to Real Madrid, drubbing, an absolute smashing Barcelona's face into ground. It wasn't. This was a 0-0. This was as boring as El Clásico gets in terms of on the field football. The teams as well, you look at the starting 11s for both sides. You've got, Banana, Reizegger, Puyol, Frank de Boer, Navarro, Mota, Xavi Cocu, Luis Enrique, Kluivert, and Saviola from Barcelona. Not, there is talent in there. I'm not going to deny that there are a few players in there that I think, do you remember him? It's not the greatest, Barcelona side you'll ever see, managed by Luis van Gaal as well. Then you've got Real Madrid with Vicente Del Bosque in charge, the World Cup winning manager in future years. They've got Casillas, Salgado, Hierro, Hulguera, Roberto Carlos, Claude Makelele, Guti, Zidane, Figo, Ronaldo, Raul. This is like, proper. There's such a divide here, isn't there, on the pitch? And it ends 0-0. What a shame.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as well, like that everything that's gone with it is normally you'd kind of forget the result of a match when there's an incident like this anyway, because you don't. I mean, I don't know what the full-time result was where Eric Cantona kicked a fan. I just know that it was Crystal Palace, the FA Cup, and for this game, you'd think like, nobody would remember anything other than the pig's head, and that's because the game was actually pretty rubbish around it. Like it wasn't a classic, if you pardon the pun. That's terrible. And then what I like about it, if anybody who's read Sid Lowe's Fear and Loathing in La Liga, he does devote a fair number of pages. I think it's about 4 or 5 pages to this whole thing, such as the size of the event and what a mark it's left on Spanish football. And there's 2 bits that remind me of that stick in my mind, is where he quotes one of like I'm presuming it's one of like the Barcelona hierarchy, where they've tried to say that like, no, it won't have been a Barcelona fan that's done that, because as he say something like we don't even eat pig's heads, or is it cochinillo here? We don't even eat Barcelona, so it won't have been us. There's a quote in there where he's spoken to Michel Salgado, and Salgado said, like, after a couple of corners, I could see that like the intention, the intensity and the hostility from the fans was getting so much that I ended up saying, like, you're on your own with this one to Figo, and left Figo to take the corners, as he could see that it was escalating. Yeah, but it's a moment in folklore, isn't it? It's one, it transcends the generations. Obviously you mentioned earlier, like, after this we had the Messi and Ronaldo era and plenty of other bits in between, but this is one that, like, really for me, like, it stands the test of time, and you always sort of see images of this in any kind of prelude to any Barcelona Real Madrid match, Clásico. You always see it. It's kind of like seen as not so much like I would say the pinnacle, because pinnacle is not the right word. That would be glorifying it, which obviously you and I are free to do, but I don't think Liga would want to glorify it themselves. But we should talk about like the aftermath a bit more, actually, and what the immediate response was, because obviously there's action taken against Barcelona for this, issued with a 4,000, well, in modern money it's 4,000 euros. It's probably like 20 million per se.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can never quite work out the percent to euro to pound part of it before my time, but
it's about astronomical.
It was a decent chunk of money, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and even a 2-match ban or ground closure, but they appealed that and get it overturned. But I think it's kind of taken on a life of its own in the media as well. Like, it travels around the world so quickly, the images of this in the newspapers the next day. I mean, obviously, Mundo Deportivo printed a large photo of it. I think somebody called it medieval, someone called it barbaric. It very, very quickly went around the world, and I remember it. Did you hear about Figo? Did you hear about, when you're in school and stuff? Travel quickly.
It became not just a defining image of the Figo transfer, which, even 2 years later, it's like we're saying, this was people going through that 5 stages of grief still. It was at least halfway through the 2000s that you kind of got that acceptance of it, that it had actually happened, and that was going on 5 years later. And I think within 3 years after that, Figo moved to Inter Milan. So it's not as if he was around for long for the acceptance to be even qualified. But I think it also becomes a defining image of the El Clásico. We've mentioned Sid Lowe's book there, Fear and Loathing. But if you've got I want to say the original copy, or maybe the second edition of Morbo by Phil Ball, Figo back at the Nou Camp for the second time is the image that adorns the front cover. And like you say, when you've got a book that speaks about Spanish football stories across the entire spectrum, and again, it's another brilliant book you should definitely go read if you haven't, to pick that one image as this is what I want Spanish football to be represented by. It's an interesting choice, really, because like you say, it does encapsulate a lot of the intensity, the rivalry, the passion of Spanish football for me, and that will always be the case with the Figo transfer. You know, it's as we've said at the beginning, this reshaped El Clásico for an entire generation of people. It added, you know, an extra dynamic between the relationship between the clubs. You know, it became about the football. It became about one-upmanship, not just on the pitch. It became, you know, there's that Borat meme, isn't there, where it's like, I get a step, he must get a step. I get a window made out of glass, he gets a window made out of glass. And that's still happening today. You know, you look at the stadium chat that we've got, like obviously the Bernabeu, you know, is the pinnacle of stadium engineering, with football pitches which disappear underground and can be used for tennis and NFL, whatever. Barcelona, like, we need to do the same now. And they needed to redevelop the stadium anyway, but they were like, right, well, we've seen what they've done. We want to do it better. Unfortunately, they haven't. They've missed the mark on that bit.
I'm sure they will have done, because, you know, with the title sponsors being Spotify. But I wonder if Barcelona would make the same mistake that Real Madrid have, which is not agree the right number of licenses for late night music events to take place at the stadium, because it'll annoy the neighbours, which I find quite amusing with regards to the Bernabeu.
Yeah, I imagine that they've hopefully got that bit right. Though it would not surprise me, given the hiccups that they've had. Yeah. Hiccups is a very kind word to use for the multiple clusterfucks that they've had trying to build this stadium over the last 3 or 4 years. And like you say, when you come back to reflecting on, you know, the whole thing as a whole, it still runs deep today, Paul. I think it was a few years ago. So something that I do quite like about modern football is these like legends games that you can get. And again, it's a commercialization thing. It's getting sad old men like myself to pay £50 for a ticket to go and watch gentlemen who are 10 years older than me knock a ball around for 90 minutes. And it's like, yay! But there was a moment where obviously Figo's been playing for Real Madrid legends and things like that. There was an opportunity for him to go and play for the Barcelona legends. And actually, Barcelona stepped in and said, no, we're not having this. We're not allowing this to happen. Change your plans. Otherwise, we're going to cause you a bit of trouble, so to speak. So, you know, you can see in such a, you know, it's just a legends game of football. They might as well have played it on bloody Common Edge in Blackpool. You know, it doesn't mean or matter anything, but the animosity is still there from Barcelona and its club and its supporters, that they saw fit to stop Figo ever pulling on the Barcelona shirt ever again.
Yeah, hey, listen, don't knock these legends games and these Masters. You know, City have recently won the indoor Masters over Liverpool a few months back. I think they were represented by Jolyon Lescott, Sean Wright Phillips, and I can't remember who else. But, you know, everything's got a trophy as a trophy, you know. No, it's nice, though, that the Barcelona, I will credit the club as a whole, stepped in and kept the intensity of the rivalry going on, even into retirement. You know, that they've... I like that. I like that. I want to see that sort of pettiness. I want to see that grow. I want to see that, you know,
you've made your bed.
Yeah. I like it. Like, you know, for example, if there was like another Legends game and it was Tebas to turn out for City, and, you know, I'd want him to do that just to wind United up, you know, stuff like that. It's
all part of the fun, isn't it? I think they've actually started doing these Legends games like without any kind of club branding now, haven't they?
Yeah,
I think to avoid stuff like this, to be fair, because it's like, you know, they get paid a lot of money to do it, to be fair, and it, you know, it's a career extender to an extent. But yeah, it made me not giggle, but you know, I was like a bit like you, Paul. Actually, you know, well done. You stand by your guns. You know, he made his bed. Now he's got to sleep.
Don't
in it,
let
so
rivalries die. You know, like we need bitterness to keep us going. Football's an escape for a lot of people. Don't water it down any more than it has been.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And And I think as well, just to see what the lasting symbolism of, the 23rd of November 2002, the fact that we're talking about it now, 23 years later, it pays testament to that. But I think it'll always be, like you say, the defining image of El Clásico, certainly from my perspective. I think it will always epitomise when the rivalry was at its hottest, is possibly the way to describe it.
I know
And
that
I think,
you'll wind a few people up with saying that, because some people would argue that it was between Messi and Ronaldo on that week where they had, or 10-day period where they had 3 or 4 Clásicos all in one go, between the 2 Copa del Rey games, etc. But I think you're correct in your statement. I just want to point out or acknowledge that some people might take an alternative view.
I will happily say that the Ronaldo Messi debate is fabricated by 15-year-olds sat behind a keyboard, typing away, and it's got nothing on the veracity of what we've seen going before it as well. And that conversation probably costs a lot of very, very good footballers the chance of winning the Ballon d'Or over a decade and a half period now. And that is the last thing I'll say in it. And like you say, I think you could apply this to Figo here. You look at the lasting legacy of Figo. He only goes on to make, like, I think it's only just about maybe a century and a half of appearances for Real Madrid over a 7-year period, which actually isn't an awful lot. And he kind of became a bit of a victim to the Galactico era himself, didn't he?
Yeah, I think we may have even gone into that a little bit when we did that Galacticos episode. I mean, I'll be going back and listening to it, and I recommend you do too. But I think, yeah, you're right. And you know what? That's fine, because, listen, that means that you and I could still catch him up in terms of appearances. So,
it's still possible.
It's still doable, isn't it? Yeah.
But by going to Real Madrid, he also did make himself that commercialised player as well, which this isn't a slight on him, because everyone was at it at the time. But the fact he was in 3 of the most iconic adverts, including footballers ever. Do you want to take a guess at the 3 I'm thinking of?
See, I'm stuck between a couple of names here. See, I think Ronaldinho was probably higher than he, even though there's a bit of inflation and everything like that. I want to say Ronaldinho because of, we've romanced about it all the time about these those Yoga Bonita adverts, and he was in at least 2 of the 3, maybe even 3 of 3. And he had his own boots and everything else. So I'm going to say Ronaldinho and Beckham.
So the 3 that I'm thinking of is he was in the football on a ship, the cage football on a ship with Cantona. He had his own team. I think it was alongside, I want to say, Inamoto and somebody else. It might have been Roberto. Cannavaro was on one of them. Yeah, I think he was one of the leaders. They had like these 6 teams, didn't they? But Figo was a captain, and he had 2 lads with him. I can't quite remember it. It was on an orange poster. We'll definitely have to dig it out.
You had the boat one, you had the airport one, and
the airport one was the second one I was thinking of, because he was key in that one with the Portugal and Brazil advert, where it's like ole. He was in that one.
Yeah.
And then the last one, which everyone forgets about, which is definitely one of my favourite. It wasn't even a Nike advert. It was the Pepsi adverts. And do you remember when they were all dressed as cowboys?
Oh, yeah, that was dreadful. Yeah, I mean...
you had the Real Madrid and you had the Manchester United Cowboys, and they're all there with, like, Stetsons on and those long leather trench coats. And then it was like a shootout between Beckham and Figo with a ball. I think Beckham came out on top, if I remember rightly. But yeah, just what a time to be alive when those adverts were on. I watch them as much as they don't age.
By comparison, like, modern adverts are rubbish, aren't they? You think about what we had, and they took it away from us. Now we just get like rubbish. Like, where's the creativity gone?
It's clickbait now that's been replaced with clickbait replaced art, ladies and gentlemen, and that is how we'll end the podcast today. But I think, like you say, this is an iconic moment in Spanish football that you could possibly put into the top 5 moments in Spanish football ever. And Luis Figo as well, who, you know, we've spoken about him in terms of him being a legend of Spanish football as well. He's absolutely rightly up there as not just a character, a personality, as a talent, but as a know, one of the most successful players to play in La Liga, and obviously elsewhere as well. So, you know, obviously nice to talk about him, nice to talk about this game. Have we got anything to plug, Paul? Should we make people aware of coming up?
Well, we've got another episode coming shortly. We've got another issue of Revista on the horizon. Actually, I'm going to just use this as an opportunity to just give a shout out to my mum. She doesn't listen or anything, so she'll never hear this. But during the last international break, she outdid me for football ground hopping, and she went to see Lanzarote versus Las Palmas C in a fantastic 1-1 draw with about 300 other people. So shout out to my mum. There we go.
Did she not fancy doing an El Partido in Directo for us, Paul?
It wouldn't be. She's not tech savvy. I asked her for a halftime update, and she just said it's been good. Well, that was it. It's been good. So
it's been good,
and I didn't get a full-time report. So,
so we'll never know. We'll have to go check ourselves. Well, the good news is, Paul, we have got an El Partido en Directo coming out this week. It would have been out earlier this week, but the Wi-Fi in my hotel in Germany was, I don't know, it was bizarre at one point. But a friend of the pod, Russ Pierce, or Seagulls Over Spanish, may know him if you follow him online. He sent us a fantastic game between Benidorm and Torrevieja. Nice. I think it's David Villa's Benidorm, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So much to listen to there. Keep an eye out for that one coming out alongside this podcast as always. And always go and listen back to some of the other ones as well. We've mentioned the Clásico's episode. That'd be a lovely little, yin and yang for this episode. We've got some other fantastic stuff on there as well. Stuff that just doesn't age, Paul, which is absolutely brilliant. But for now, I'll say thank you very much to yourself, Paul, for joining me on this wonderful Thursday evening.
Oh, thanks as always, Nick. It's an absolute pleasure.
And I'll thank you, everybody at home. Say gracias for listening. Go like and subscribe wherever you can. Follow us on social media and share our stuff. That would be lovely as well. And head over to YouTube. We are almost at a dizzying 100 subscribers. Did they send you like a wooden plaque or something like that for 100 subscribers?
I hope definitely get an email. And
that is good.
That's what we need in our lives. So if everybody can just tell their friends and just help us get to 100 so that we can have an email, because we never get we do. We get a lot of emails. We get a lot of spam, but this one won't go in the spam folder, and that would be nice.
Yeah, exactly. Shove your football content awards up your arse. We want an email from YouTube saying we've got 100 subscribers, so go and do us a favor there. We'll catch you next week for another episode, and as I've been saying all week, Auf Wiedersehen.